Boom. So 11.6, this is all the Great Depression stuff, right? It's the causes, the consequences of the Great Depression, and then how Hoover tries to deal with it, and then how FDR deals with it. So, boom. I added some of the stuff from that one-page thing that Rihanna loves, right? Studying. Some of you are studying the short little blurbs. I put some of these blurbs in between my question just to kind of give you some flow, especially when I don't cover it well. So, on my question. So, you have this entity in the U.S. called the Federal Reserve that was created in 1913. The Federal Reserve, the point of it, right, created during the progressive time period was to stabilize our money system. It kind of fails and doesn't do its job very well, and you're going to end up with the Great Depression. In the late 1920s, the problems are building up that are going to lead to the Great Depression. There's uneven distribution of wealth. That means a few people at the top have a lot of money, and all the people at the bottom don't have that much. We're going there again. I think right now this is the worst it's been since 1929, where like 1% of the population has vast majorities of wealth and income, and the rest of us, unless you're not us, but the rest of us don't have so much. Then there was too much production with low demand, right? We produce so much stuff, there's nobody to buy it. Too much credit, speculation on stock. We talked about buying on margin, overproduction on farms, so farm prices are going to be low, high tariffs, all that. So it's going to lead to problems that you're then going to get the stock market crash, and then bam, Great Depression. So October 1929, stock market crash happens. The stock market crash doesn't cause the depression, but it's the trigger. It's kind of the signal that the depression comes, and Congress tries to deal with it right away. They put on a tariff, but the tariff actually hurts us because now we can't sell stuff to other countries because then they put tariffs on us, and it goes back and forth, back and forth. Hoover cut spending, raised taxes, makes things worse. This is 11.6. So then my questions that are in your packet. How does Franklin Roosevelt then, after Hoover's responses fail, how does Franklin Roosevelt try to solve the Great Depression? If you remember, his stuff's relief, recovery, reform, 3 R's. He's going to try to stimulate the economy. Right, give people immediate relief, try to recover the economy by stimulating it, and then reform the economy so a Great Depression never happens again. So he believes in something called Keynesian economics, where you prime the pump of the economy. You put a lot of money into the economy. The government spends because nobody else is. That's the idea. So the government is spending money, trying to get the money flowing. If you remember, I showed you like pumps and water flowing or dollars flowing. So that means you spend money even if it means you're borrowing it, even if you have to run budget deficits so that you can create jobs and restore the economy. So he starts all kinds of programs, right? Massive spending on government jobs. Remember all those WPA, CCC, all the programs like that to try to get the economy going. It helps, but you don't ever think that the New Deal actually ended the Great Depression. It doesn't. It's actually World War II that ends the Depression. But of course, you can look at that as massive government spending too, because the government will spend all kinds of money on our military weapons. How did the Great Depression devastate people's lives? People lost their jobs, they lost their homes. People are living in shanty towns. Remember, they were called Hoovervilles. A lot of them are getting their food from soup kitchens, bread lines. The unemployment rate was high, up to 25%. Among the African American population, it's 50%. Farmers lose their farms, so people are devastated because of the Great Depression. What's the Dust Bowl and what's it lead to? Dust Bowl was that drought in the 1930s. What caused it? The farming practices leading up to that. The U.S. government, we didn't study this. There's something called the Homestead Act, and people could get 160 acres. So a bunch of people go out west, they get 160 acres, and then they start plowing up the fields and turning over all this stuff so that instead of these natural grasses that preserve the soil for a long time, now the soil's turned over. If there's no rain, the wind comes, it blows away all the topsoil. So turn the soil to dust. It affected a huge area of the Great Plains like Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and it's a bowl-shaped area, so it's called the Dust Bowl. Again, farmers lose their farms because they've got low crop prices. They are in high debt because they've borrowed money to buy tractors. They borrowed money to buy more land. What caused the Dust Bowl? Oh, I just talked about this. Drought and bad farming practices. I talked about everything on this screen. How did the Dust Bowl affect California socially and economically? Because the Dust Bowl is not in California. So how does it affect us? Our population grows. Remember the Okies, all the people who are fleeing the Dust Bowl, coming to California, Route 66, all of that stuff. And then they come here and they drive the wages in California down because when there's more people competing for the same kind of jobs, then it's going to drive those wages down. What did Father Coughlin, Huey Long, and Dr. Townsend have in common? These are people who criticized the New Deal, right? They're critics of FDR. They're critics of the New Deal. They all thought the New Deal doesn't do enough. They're like, the New Deal should go further. So these are people who are more liberal than FDR, more, people would say, are more to the left of FDR. They're like, you're not doing enough, you got to do more. Then you have, what did President Hoover, President Taft, these are former presidents, and the American Liberty League think about the New Deal. They're like, the New Deal does too much, right? These are critics also, but they're people who criticize them for, no, government shouldn't do all this stuff. They would have been the laissez-faire kind of people, stay out of the economy. They think the New Deal would have threatened individual liberty. They would be the people who today would be calling Obama a socialist, same kind of thing. So the New Deal, its economic policies that it went through, AAA, CCC, WPA, all that stuff, permanently expand the role of the federal government. That's a trend in this class, right? That you see all the way through our history. We start off with small government, wars and emergencies end up giving our government more power, more control. What was the CCC? What are its goals? CCC is Civilian Conservation Corps. It employs young men during the Great Depression doing conservation projects. The idea is they get then a little bit of income. They'll spend that money, maybe grow the economy. Good. Since they're out in the forest, they're required to send some of that money home so that hopefully their families will spend that money. What's the WPA? It's the Works Progress Administration. What's it achieve? Again, this is a huge government jobs program. It's an example of Keynesian economics. It's the government spending money on jobs so that people will hopefully spend the money, stimulate the economy. They build millions of, employs millions, building dams, bridges, highway, schools, etc. What's Social Security? That comes during the New Deal also. Who does it help? How's it different than the way things are done before? It's an old age pension for retired workers. Same kind of thing, though. If we give money to older people who don't have it, maybe they'll spend it and stimulate the economy. Old people used to be on their own, right? There is no old age pension in the past. And now we're wondering whether we can afford to continue doing this now. But we start this program and old people rely on Social Security pretty much today. It also provided unemployment assistance and aid for children and the disabled. What did the Wagner Act do? Also called the National Labor Relations Act. What's it lead to? Establishes the rights of workers to organize and join unions. FDR is pro-worker, pro-union. And he's, remember the guys before? Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover? Pro-business. Now FDR is pro-workers, pro-unions. And he wants them to have the right to have a union. This stuff's in our... We're kind of debating these things over again today, like in Wisconsin and some states, like how much power should a union have? Should they be able to do stuff together? But the Wagner Act leads to then the growth of unions, and more people will join unions. They'll have the right to strike, stuff like that. Unions have to be treated fairly according to the Wagner Act, and businesses have to bargain with them. What's the TVA? Tennessee Valley Authority. What are its negatives? It's organized during the New Deal. It built dams along the Tennessee River. They produced electricity, brought power to rural areas, protects against floods because you have these dams now. And some people say, what are the negatives? Some people say it's not fair that the government is in the business of providing electricity, because that means that we can't get into the business of providing electricity because then they have a monopoly, unfair competition, and some people say that's not fair. Still exists today. The AAA I don't have on my question, so I threw it in here. Remember the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, paid farmers not to grow food, right? The idea was we'll pay them to not grow food, not raise pigs, whatever. So the idea was that the prices of food would go up. So that, well, that first year they actually had to destroy stuff because the program came out so late. So the idea, prices would be higher, hopefully farmers would make more money. But if you look at the flip side of that, what's that mean? We would have all been paying more money for food in a time period of depression. What's the legacy of the New Deal? That means what's its impact on our history, both positive and negative? The New Deal put in relief, recovery, reform. The reform stuff put in a system to try to avoid future depressions. I think it's worked. It's bad now, but probably not as bad as it was then. Created things like the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. What's it do? Protect your bank savings. Because remember, part of the beginning of this thing with people's fear, and they did a run on the bank, and the banks all go bankrupt. Then there's the SEC, because a lot of this came through the stock market, where there were no rules really. The stock market's going to be regulated with the Security Exchange Commission, which is SEC. So overall, government has more power. I told you that again, right? War, emergencies, our government tends to get more power. What's been the general trend of worker participation in unions since the 1930s? Participation went up from the 30s, 40s, and then peaks in the 50s. So more and more people joining unions, and then it's been on a slow, steady decline ever since. Because businesses have gotten more power over time and want to reduce the power of unions, and that's kind of happened through our history. Yeah. Organized labor will have, at its most influential point, will have a third of all workers in a labor union. I think today it's down to like 11 or 12% of workers are actually in a labor union. You'll have labor unions like the AFL and the CIO, which will merge and represent millions of workers. And then, of course, we have the United Farm Workers that we talked about later with Cesar Chavez, who organizes the Great Boycott.